Rolling. All right, ladies and gentlemen, a formal welcome to Torah Studies. This is Torah Studies, our weekly look and exploration of the Torah portion. Torah portion of this week is Vaeschanan, Vaeschanan, depending on how you pronounce it. Either way, don't call it late for dinner. All right, I don't know what that means, but we are going to explore a theme that is prevalent in tonight's class, which is all about two things. Number one, first theme is about preconceptions. Everyone's got them. Everyone's got a preconception. You came into this class with a preconception about preconceptions. You see that? You didn't even know it, but you did because I told you so. So preconceptions, everyone's got preconceptions about something. And the notion of early childhood education or early education as described, as advocated by Torah. These are the two major topics of tonight's class as we explore this week's Torah portion. All right, so let's talk about the Torah portion. How do we get to preconceptions? How do we get to early childhood? So here we go. Torah portion is Vaeschanan and Vaeschanan, and in this Torah portion, Moses continues his final message to the Jewish people. 37 days, each and every day, he gathers the people with a shmooze, with some encouragement, with some criticism, constructive criticism. And it's all about kind of his farewell, his loving farewell to his people, to make sure that everybody is going to carry the baton. Speaking of which, the Olympics are coming up. Raise your hand if you're aware of the Olympics. Yes, we know what the Olympics are? Japan. Yes. Now, in the 1980s, I think it might have been 80 some. When were the Olympics, Summer Olympics in Los Angeles, California? Los Angeles was 84. Nice. All right. So Los Angeles, yes, correct. LA, Los Angeles. Okay. So Rabbi Schusterman told the story today. We had a staff meeting and he mentioned the story, which I love. I heard it before, but it's a really great story. So I'll share it with you again. I'll share it with you and I will hear it myself say it again because I've heard it before. So here we go. It was after the 1984 Olympics at some point, and Rabbi Schusterman had his bar mitzvah. His father gave a speech at his bar mitzvah, at Rabbi Schusterman's bar mitzvah. Where was he living? In Long Beach. He grew up in Long Beach. Yeah, California. Yeah, California boy. So he had his bar mitzvah. His dad spoke, and his message was like the Olympics. Like the relay races. You pass the baton. So he talked about the Olympics and passing the baton and how every generation coming of age, bar mitzvah, yada, 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 right? I gave you enough, you can write the speech already yourselves. What happened was, it was such a nice speech and his father's a bit of a writer, so he decided to write it down. And he submitted it for a Chabad publication called the Yiddish Haim, which is like the Jewish Home, it translates to the Jewish Home, and it was a monthly or period, I don't know how often it came out, some sort of periodical with articles and essays and whatnot. So he wrote this article, and the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, actually edited every edition of this catalog, of this magazine. And the Rebbe read the article, and I think I've seen this edit, and like slash marks through the whole thing, like the whole thing that was on the Olympics, slash marks, and saying, he wrote a note, like a comment on it in Hebrew, saying something along the lines of, the source is idolatrous. That was it. Boom. The source of Greek gods. So we don't need to I'm going to use the Yiddish word. We don't need to get all involved in it, in analogies and parables and metaphors and bring it down to Judaism. It's got its thing. We've got our thing, and that's it. Now, that's just an interesting story, but I mentioned this because I caught myself saying the phrase, pass the baton. Nonetheless, that's a long way of just commenting on my own turn of phrase. Yes, does the story make sense? Let me check in with you guys. Yes? Yes? I'm getting a lot of what was that story? Did that story not make sense? Yes? The Rebbe was essentially saying, you have something that is a global phenomenon, but it begins in idolatrous practice, the source of which is idolatry or pagan gods and worship of gods and human sacrifice, etc. So maybe it's not such a Jewish thing.
No, the source was an athletic contest.
Was Zeus involved?
No, I don't think he ran.
All right, listen, it was Greek, huh? Ich weiß nicht. I'm not an expert in this, but I don't mind Googling it after class. Whatever. Anybody could Google it and see if you find any pagan sources. Listen, I'm telling you a story. This is the story that I've heard, and that's it. Now, getting back to our story. So Moses is about to pass the baton to Joshua to lead the Jewish people after his pass. So he's gathering the people and encouraging them. This week's Torah portion is a best of. Oh my gosh, are you kidding me? We got the Shema. Shema Yisrael, right? We got the Shema in this week's Torah portion. We have the repeat, because if you thought the first time was great, the sequel is even better, right? So we got the repeat of the 10 Commandments. We have, what else is in this week's Torah portion? Other stuff, other like top hits of the 80s and 90s and today. You can probably realize which decade I grew up in. Anyway, so there's a lot of top stuff going on in this week's Torah portion. And again, the Shema is in it, which brings me to today's topic. So one of the most important mitzvot that we have, one of the most important Jewish obligations that we have, is to do what we're doing right now, right? Which is shmuz about the Olympics. No, which is study Torah. Studying Torah is one of the most important mitzvot. Here's my question. Here's the question. Where does it say in Torah that you should study Torah? Where does it say it? Aha, trick question. Where does it say in Torah that you should study Torah? How do we know that you're supposed to study Torah? You ever wonder? You're wondering now? You're wondering now. Okay, right. What's the source? Does it say in the verse? And oh, by the way, don't forget to study all of this and you'll be tested on it. I mean, is there a source to this? How do we know that you're supposed to study Torah? Because there's 613 mitzvot. And one of the 613 is study Torah. Where does it say it?
Isn't there
Richard. Oh, no, sorry, Paul, go. Yeah.
Isn't there a mitzvah that says you're supposed to write your own Torah?
Yes. Now, writing is one thing. Writing, you copy it from an existing scroll. Actually, you have to copy it from an existing scroll. You cannot do it by memory. You have to look at a scroll. You have to have an existing kosher scroll open and copy it letter for letter, word for word from that existing scroll. That doesn't necessarily imply learning Torah. That just implies that you're writing a Torah and you're having a Torah. Now, you might ask the obvious question, well, why would you have it if you don't? Why would you write it and have it if you don't study it? Who knows? Where's the verse that says you have to study Torah? So the answer, I'll tell you the answer straight up. The answer is.
But Richard has something to say.
Oh, Richard, I knew you had something. I thought I heard you were. I thought I sensed some movement from
I don't know where it's from, but it's in the prayer book about visiting the sick, dowering the bride, attending the dead to the grave for the study of Torah. I've waived them all. I don't know if I just look.
Good. So what Richard is saying is that the what's it called again?
I don't know.
Right in the prayers, it says that Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, that Torah study is equivalent to all the mitzvot, all the great mitzvot. Sure, where'd they get it from? Where'd the rabbis get it from? How do we know that there's a mitzvah to study Torah? Yeah, the rabbis. We know that it is, but what's the written source? So the answer is from the Shema, which is in this week's Torah portion. Where does the Shema say to study Torah? You guys remember?
It's lots of places.
Good.
I mean, several places in this parsha.
Yes.
V'shinotam levanecha, v'divarta b'am, v'shivtecha v'eitecha, l'chavader, v'shavtecha v'kumecha, all of that
hold on,
stuff.
let me do some translating.
Okay.
But actually, hold on. Maybe we have it in our text. Let me see if we have it here. Yeah, you know what? I don't need to do translating.
It's right after that. Yeah.
We need to do translating when we have a text.
Right after Shema.
I'm gonna share my screen with you, and we're gonna do this together. Okay. So for those of you online, you now see this screen. For those of you in person, we are on page number 55, and here we go. Text number 1. Okay. Last week I learned that it's hard to hear when the texts are read in person, not by me. So I'm going to read all the texts, and that's it. Listen, this is a work in progress. We're figuring out the best way to do this. I'm going to read the text for right now. Text number 1 from Deuteronomy 6:7. Here we go. The Torah says, this is in the Shema, and you shall teach them. What's them? Them are words of Torah to your sons or to your children, and speak of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk on the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. And that's essentially what Chazan Ben said. right? You shall teach them to your sons, to your children, speak of them when you sit in your house, speak of them, words of Torah, when you sit in your house, and when you walk on the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. In other words, we should be Malay v'Gadish, completely consumed, completely obsessed with words of Torah, studying Torah, and teaching Torah. What's interesting here is, and this is something that the commentators point out, and the halachic authorities point out, is that the source of learning Torah is intertwined with the mitzvah of teaching Torah. There's no clear source independent that says you shall study Torah. It's in the context of teaching your kids. It says teach your kids and you should speak about them, which implies that if you want to teach your kids, you probably have to know what you're teaching, right? So if you're teaching your kids, you have to know a little bit about the Torah to teach them. Otherwise, how are you teaching them Torah? So, but it's in the context of teaching that study kind of comes up. This is not my observation. In other words, it doesn't come from me. This comes from none other than Maimonides. Let's take a look at text 2a. So again, in your booklets, it's on page 56. Let's see this. It's on page 56. On the screen, it's on the screen. And this is from Maimonides, Hilchot Talmud Torah, the laws of Torah study, chapter 1. And this is how he begins the laws of Torah study. Maimonides, again, just to refresh your memory, Maimonides lived about, what was it, like 800-900 years ago, and he essentially collected all of Jewish law and organized it in just an incredible way. So here we go. Rambam says a father is obligated to teach his son Torah while he is a minor. As the verse states, and you shall teach them to your sons and speak about them. Here we go. Let's continue inside. Just as a person is obligated to teach his son, so too he is obligated to teach his grandson. As the verse commands, and you shall teach them to your sons and your grandsons. That's a different verse. Let's continue. This charge is not confined to one's children and grandchildren alone. In other words, it's not only limited. Teaching Torah is not limited to one's physical blood relative descendants. Rather, it is a mitzvah, Rambam continues, it is a mitzvah for each and every wise man to teach all students, even though they are not his children. As the verse states, and you shall teach them to your sons, and the oral tradition explains, your sons refers to, these are your students. So here we have now already a bit of an interpretation, or I don't know what you want to call it, like a non-literal understanding of it, which says that when in the Shema, Vaeschanan levnecha, teach it to your sons, it doesn't mean only literally your sons, it means anyone, students. That's what we're doing, yeah. Well, I don't know that I'm teaching as much as facilitating a conversation. The Torah is teaching itself, hopefully. The text, Rambam is teaching you. I'm just helping introduce you guys, right? But nonetheless, this is
so humble, Rabbi Ari.
I only said it so that you would comment humble, but thank you for no, I'm just joking. So essentially, what Rambam is saying is it's a mitzvah to teach our kids. It's a mitzvah to teach our grandkids. It's a mitzvah to teach anybody that needs to learn Torah, even if they're not related, because that's what our sages tell us. Your sons doesn't mean physical sons only, but also all students. Let's continue. A person.
But in most, Rabbi, excuse me for interrupting.
Yeah.
But in most Sidurim, and I'm not sure if it's in the Chabad Sidur, one of the first prayers that you find after Modani Lefonecha is V'ha'arev Toratcha B'finu V'fi Chayisrael V'fi Tzatzaenu and all of that stuff.
Yes.
So it's a constant reminder to us on a daily basis,
Correct.
not just in this week's Torah Parsha.
Yeah, right? Agreed. It's a constant reminder that we have to study Torah and teach Torah, and we see the children studying Torah. But here's really the punchline. Look at Rambam, the last paragraph here on page 56, text 2a. Look at the last paragraph. He says, a person who was not instructed by his father, in other words, if somebody never was taught Torah as a child, right? So that person is obligated to arrange for his own instruction when he can understand. As the verse states, and you shall study them and take heed to perform them. So essentially, and again, I need to highlight how kind of almost we're backing into this idea of studying Torah, right? The Maimonides starts by saying it's a mitzvah to teach Torah to your kids. It's a mitzvah to teach Torah to your grandkids. It's a mitzvah to teach Torah to anyone who needs it. Oh, by the way, if you haven't studied yourself, if you weren't taught yourself, then you should learn it on your own. So it's a weird way. Listen, I'm with all due respect to Maimonides, it's a bit strange. He should, if I was writing this, here what I would say. It's a mitzvah to study Torah. And once you have some information, share it, pass it along. You know where it says that? That model on an airplane. There's a lot of drama on airplanes nowadays. I've been like, I don't know, all these weird things going on. But that's neither here nor there. What is it? What's the announcement? I don't know if they make announcements anymore. I think Delta makes funny videos. No. Yes. What's who? Oxygen masks, right? Please God, they don't need to deploy. Everything is good, right? But what happens if the oxygen masks deploy? You put your mask on first before assisting another, right? They don't say assist the other. And if no one assisted you, then you should put it on yourself. That's what's going on here with Rambam, right? You should teach Torah to someone else. And if no one taught you, then you study it on your own. What's going on? It's so weird, so strange. It should be first things first, you study Torah, and then you teach it to your kid. All right, so that's what we're noticing. Now let's
can I say one more thing? I'm sorry to interrupt you, Rabbi. You
Yes.
should probably mute me forever. But
I don't know about that, but no, if you don't mind,
but the interesting thing is correlating to the Ten Commandments in this week's parsha, right? The only cause and effect commandment, right, is kabed avicha v'et imecha l'ma'an yarichun yamecha.
Right.
It's so that you honor your parents, so that your days may be lengthened.
Right.
In this week's parsha, interestingly enough, in Chamishi, just before the Shema, and it's chapter 6, verse. I've just happened to be looking at it because I'm reading the Torah this week, and so I've been studying it all week long. And it says here, "L'man tirat Adonai lehecha lishmor et kol chukotav v'mitzvotav asher anochi tzaveh ata uvincha uven vincha kol yamei chayecha l'ma'an yarichun yamecha."
Nice.
So it repeats that same cause and effect, and the only cause and effect commandment, right?
Right.
Those are the two. One is to honor your parents. The other one is to teach your children and your grandchildren.
Intergenerational stuff. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
It's a great observation. It's all about continuity. It's about one generation caring about the next, and one generation caring for the prior. And it's like this crossover. Beautiful point. So, so we're just noticing though that when it comes to the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, when it comes to the mitzvah of Torah, it's really written in a bit what we would say a backwards order. It says first, it talks about teaching your kids, and then kind of as an aside, also, don't forget to learn also.
Teach yourself.
We see, exactly. Put your own mask on. Now, we also see this in text 2b. So let's put this up on the screen, and if you don't mind, let's turn to page 57 in our booklets here. So 57 is again from Rambam, and this comes from another source of Rambam, which is Sefer HaMitzvot, the book of Mitzvot. And Rambam writes as follows, text 2b, the 11th mitzvah. This is his count of the 613 mitzvot and the 248 positive mitzvot. He says, number 11, the 11th positive mitzvah is that we are commanded to study and to teach the wisdom of Torah. This is called Talmud Torah. Okay, that's what he says. The source of this commandment is, how do we know that we have a mitzvah to study? He says study first here, study and then teach, which makes sense. Conceptually, study and then teach. He says, what's the source? The source of this commandment is God's statement, teach them to your children. See that the source of studying Torah is teach them to your children. This commandment is repeated numerous times. Learn them, do them, so that you will learn them. This commandment is stressed and encouraged in various passages spread throughout the Talmud. And essentially what we have here is, again, this idea that studying Torah is kind of wrapped in the context of teaching Torah, which is going to raise two questions that I'm going to ask in a second. But first, I need to look for something to make sure that our power is going to continue. Second. See this? Always have, for those of you at home, I didn't realize my computer is low on battery. I'm in a bit of a different setup. So luckily in the Ark, don't ask me why, there is an extension cord. Don't ask me why I know this, but there's an extension. I may have put it there. There's an extension cord by the Ark, so we will be okay. Hopefully. Talk amongst yourselves.
Intermission.
Not really. I mean, yeah, like maybe 60 seconds. Friends, we're back in business. Okay, so we have now this idea that Torah study is a mitzvah. It's commandment number 11, mitzvah number 11. And this is not on the count of the 10 commandments. This is just Rambam's count of the mitzvah. This is mitzvah number 11, study Torah, teach Torah. And how do we know this? Vaeschanan, teach it to your kids. Okay, and so we're going to ask two questions. All of this evokes two questions. Question, hold on one second. Let's one more source. One more source. This is from the Code of Jewish Law. Take a look. Please turn to page 58, and I'm going to pull it up on the screen as well. This is Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. He writes as follows. You'll love this. There is an active mitzvah on every Jewish person to teach their son Torah, their child Torah. If one's parents did not teach them, they're obligated to study on their own. You see that? Again, Maimonides alluded to that before. I mean, he said that, but here we have it clearly defined in the Code of Jewish Law, in Shulchan Aruch, Yoredeh 245.1. He says it's a mitzvah to teach Torah, and if your parents didn't teach you, then you have an obligation to study on your own. Once again, we find that there is some sort of a binding of Torah study with teaching, and the question is why? Why can't the mitzvah of Torah study be independent on its own? Why can't it just be you have to study Torah, you have a mitzvah to teach Torah, two separate things? No, it's like there's somehow one is wrapped up in the other. Okay, let's welcome Dr. Maxey. Welcome. It's great to have you here. Okay, so we're left with the question, or we're about to formulate the question, and the Rebbe actually asks it right here in text number 4. Why is it that Torah study, the mitzvah to study Torah, is sourced in the mitzvah to teach Torah? Why isn't it freestanding? Take a look, text 4. It is puzzling. The Rebbe says, again, page 58, text 4. It is puzzling. It would make sense to first state the overall mitzvah to learn Torah, namely personal Torah study, and only thereafter to state that it's not enough to learn on your own, but you also must teach others, starting with your own child. It would make sense if you and I were kind of, formulating the mitzvah of studying Torah and teaching Torah. We would say, look, number 1 is you got to study, and number 2, you should share your wisdom. Number 1, you put on your oxygen mask, and number 2, you help someone else put theirs on. That makes sense chronologically, conceptually. Intellectually, the whole thing, spiritually, the whole thing makes sense. You study Torah and then you share with others. But Torah has a different formulation. How do we know that you need to study Torah? Because you have to teach your kids. Why doesn't it have its own source? Why isn't it a freestanding law of study and then teaching? Does that make sense? Yes, that's question number 1. We have a second question. Question number 2. Question number 2 is, why is it that the concept of studying Torah, which we know now is linked to teaching Torah, is specifically linked to teaching the Torah to a young child? Why do I say young child? It says son, yeah, but specifically, as Rambam says, Rambam uses the word katan. Katan means a young child, a minor. So not like a teenager, and not, whatever, your son who's like 20 and ready to go, with Kabbalah. No, this is your child who is a katan, who is a young child. So why is it that number 1, the mitzvah of Torah study is linked to Torah teaching Torah to kids, and why specifically young kids? That's the question. Second question. I think I may have mentioned this last week in one of the classes. Okay, well, before I continue, does that make sense? The two questions make sense? Yeah? Why is learning linked to teaching, and why are we talking about teaching specifically young kids? Okay. A good question points us toward the direction of the answer. Not a good question just throws you off, off kilter. But a good question is essentially what a good maze does. Like a good maze, like the good ones, like the back of cereal boxes. That was a joke, right? Like a good maze. So you get into the maze and you're like heading down a path and you're following it. It's like this whole thing. And then you hit a wall And you're like, ugh. So you retrace your footsteps, but now you know not to go there, right? You're not going to go back there. I mean, that would be silly. So you go to the next option. You hit a wall. Okay, great. So you retrace your footsteps, and now you know where to go. Let's say there's 4 options. You hit a wall 3 times. Now you know where to go. So a question is essentially a wall that goes up. A wall that goes up. And it says you can't, the logic doesn't work. You're hitting a logical wall you can't go past. So one could get frustrated and say, oh man, I had a good idea, now I hit a wall. But the really curious mind says, the person who's really, really wants to acquire knowledge and wisdom says, oh, great. I'm so glad I hit a wall because now I know where not to go. Now I know where to go. In other words, the wall points me in the right direction. The obstruction, the question, is actually leading me into the answer. Does that make sense? So that's why it says that a good question is already a half an answer. Right? A good question is you're already halfway to the answer. I would say, I would modify it. I don't know where this, I know it's a Jewish quote and in some Jewish language. At some point, someone said this. With all respect to whoever authored it, I would actually go further and say that a really good question is almost 100% the answer. You see this derech halimud, you see this way of learning, the way the Rebbe would teach. If you study, like the Rebbe's talks on Rashi, after the Rebbe's mother passed away in the 1960s, the Rebbe dedicated many, many Shabbat Farbrengens to expounding and exploring the commentary of Rashi on that week's Torah portion. Not all of it, there's a lot of Rashi, but the Rebbe would take one Rashi and analyze it. And I know I've spoken about this before, but I think it's really important to mention it again. Because it's unheard of, this type of this methodology of study. And it wasn't just that the Rebbe was teaching, the Rebbe was teaching us how to learn. It wasn't just the Rebbe giving an insight. Because in insight, you just, here's the explanation, boom, you're done. It was a derech halimud, it was a way to learn, a way to think. First of all, the Rebbe established a whole philosophy behind Rashi's commentary. Like Rashi wouldn't address it if it was obvious. Rashi only addresses things that are on the basic level, whatever. He has a whole framework of understanding Rashi. And then when a given, and Rashi, by the way, is the primary commentary of the Torah, it stands for Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki. His name was Rabbi, he was a rabbi, his name was Shlomo, the son of Yitzchak, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, the acronym of which rabbis are Reish, Shlomo, Shin, Yitzchaki, Yud is Yud, Rashi, Reish, Shin, Yud. So Rashi, the great commentary on the Torah, so the Rebbe would quote a Rashi. That was pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Something that people had studied for the last 800 years without any problems. And the Rebbe would ask a dozen questions and completely eviscerate it, like shred the Rashi to pieces. And you one question, another question, literally like a dozen or more questions on 2 lines of text. And you thought it made sense. You walked in, yeah, I understand Rashi. And after those questions, you're like, it makes no sense at all. But every single time, the questions that the Rebbe asked on Rashi were not just eviscerating Rashi. I don't mean eviscerating like the tradition, but not just, ripping it apart, but showing you what it doesn't mean and leading you in the direction of what it does mean. And so often I do this. I don't know if it's a game, but it's a thing that I do when studying one of these teachings on Rashi is from the questions, try to see where the Rebbe is leading the conversation for the answer. And you don't always get it right. I don't always get it right, but get pretty close a lot of times. The question, a good question leads you to the answer. And in this case, the reason why I'm saying all this is because I asked you 2 questions. Those 2 questions are the answer. And you're thinking, what are we talking about? We ask questions, not answers. The questions are the answer. Let me restate the question, and you tell me if you can think of what I mean here. The question was, how come the Torah links Torah study, the mitzvah to study Torah, with the mitzvah of teaching Torah to kids, and specifically young kids? Those are both questions combined, right? Why would Torah couch, frame, right? Contextualize the mitzvah of studying Torah with the mitzvah of teaching Torah to young kids. So what's the answer? Because you know the answer, right? It's obvious. Because the way we're supposed to learn Torah, which is the mitzvah of learning Torah, is in a way that kids learn Torah. Are you with me on that? That was the answer. That's it. The question is the answer. The question is, how come Talmud Torah, the mitzvah of studying Torah, is framed in the mitzvah of teaching Torah to kids? And the answer is because when we study Torah, we're supposed to do it like kids study Torah. What does that mean? All right, that's what we have the next 24 minutes to talk about. Marnine.
Can't hear you.
I'm going to repeat the question. That's impossible to hear from this mic. Yeah. And the little, right. It's saying, and a little child shall lead. Is that a messianic prophecy that a little child is going to lead the,
It's a Christian, isn't it a Christian?
Oh, maybe. Okay, that too. Who knows? Listen, it's Torah studies. Anything goes. No, I'm kidding. Right. Exact. But so there's one thing that when we teach a child, so we're learning. But this is a little bit of a different twist. It's the way we're supposed to learn Torah is the way that a child learns Torah. In other words, Torah is meant to be studied by us adults in a way that a child studies Torah. What does that mean? Childlike. Now you can already imagine what that means, right? I think you and I can already imagine what that means, right? What does it mean to study Torah like a child? It means wonder, curiosity, openness, good, all things that we're going to talk about. And we have some really beautiful insights, some really beautiful insights to share. Yes, Richard.
Yeah, just a quick comment. Weeks ago, you had mentioned that learning, it was a big mistake to learn Torah when you were a kid because you got all the wrong ideas and therefore learn as adults more sophisticated. And now you're saying, to me, it seems a flip on that, learn it with a childlike point of view, from a child's mind. So can you help coordinate that with me? Those 2 points.
Why don't get so perturbed by a contradiction? It's okay.
I apologize.
Why are you getting so worked up about a contradiction?
I'm not.
I said a few weeks ago that it's not great that studying Torah as a kid has a disadvantage, and tonight we're talking about an advantage.
Right. I'm wrong and I'm right. I'm wrong and I'm right.
No, you're right and you're right. You're right and you're right. No, that was right what I said a few weeks ago, and it's right what I'm saying tonight.
Of course.
Rabbi, this is Steve Strait. Could it have something to do with tabla blanca, the blank slate, which is close to a child?
Yes.
Starting totally blank.
Yes, we're going to talk about a blank slate in a moment. We actually are, yes, Steve, excellent point. We're actually going to cite a Mishnah from Pirkei Avot and a Midrash Shmuel commentary and the Rebbe's commentary on that commentary that is going to be absolutely magnificent, but it deals with blank slates. But in a moment. But first, getting back to Richard's question. Richard's question is one sec. So I want to clarify 2 things. First of all, what I said a few weeks ago that, we shouldn't teach kids. So obviously, I think I said then, I don't mean this literally, but right. I preface that by saying I don't mean it literally. We have to study Torah. We have to teach Torah to kids. As kids, we have to study Torah. That's the bread and butter of Judaism and Jewish life. So that's a given. What I meant to say is that sometimes Torah is taught to kids, and the kids get the impression that's a big Baba Maisa, that it's a big fairy tale. There was Noah and a boat and animals and Adam and Eve and a serpent, and they get that story, and it sounds juvenile because it's taught in a juvenile way, and it sounds juvenile to the kids. And the child, when they get a little bit older, they reach their teenage years or they become bar mitzvah, and they check out and they say, "Oh, Judaism, it's so nice." Really? Back to TikTok. That's what happens, right? What happens is it's nice. Sure, it's nice for fairy tales, Baba Mises, but I know all the fairy tales, so I think I'm good. I can check out now because I know the fairy tales. That's the challenge. The problem is not that we're not teaching or studying Torah to a child or as a child. It's when it's reduced to the point that the child doesn't have a sense that there's something deeper, and we don't continue to make the Torah more sophisticated as the child gets older. If you're teaching a 13-year-old bar mitzvah boy or a 12-year-old bar mitzvah girl the same way you teach a 5- and 6-year-old child, that's a problem. Because at 12 and 13, they're curious and they have real questions. You want to tell them a story about Adam and Eve and a boat and a ship and a Noah and a this and a that, you're talking to the wrong crowd. It's like giving a touch and feel book right? To a teenager. You go to a bookstore, they have different categories of books. You're giving a touch and feel book. Touch the fluffy bunny. Thank you. I don't want to touch.
They're great books, by the way.
I think we're good. I know those are some of the best. I wrote some Jewish touch and feel books, by the way. You can Google this. A Touch of Passover, I wrote. You have Touch of Passover. It's translated in multiple languages. It's an all-time bestseller. Honestly, it was the easiest book I wrote. Touch the crunchy matzah. Feel the sticky wine. Touch the whatever. It was like the easiest book ever. The script wrote itself. Legit.
Wake up
The
your Uncle
hardest part
George.
was sourcing the various touch and feel items, like to get the proper stickiness of the sticky in the right shapes. Anyway, back to our story. Enough about that stuff. So I said a few weeks ago, we have to be careful to make sure that when we're teaching kids, that we're opening up their perspective to a Torah that is sophisticated, as intellectually challenging, that's meaningful. What I'm saying tonight is there's still value in studying Torah with the wonder, and as Steve said, the blank slate of a child, which we're about to talk about. Which one is true? They're both true. They're not mutually exclusive. They're both true. So events of Umaret, it's like the story, the two guys with the rabbi, you know the story. All right, we're not going to tell the joke. Everyone knows the story. We're moving on. Okay, so back, and now you're wondering, what's that story? Two guys come to the rabbi, and each one, they're fighting with each other, and one presents his side of the story, and the rabbi says, I think you're right. You make a good argument. The other guy says, are you kidding me? And he says another side of the argument. He says, you're right. And from the other room, the rabbits and the rabbi's wife says, how can they both be right? And the rabbi says, you're also right. So events of Umaret, depends what you're talking about. All right, I told you everyone knows this.
Fiddler on the Roof. There we go.
Yes, exactly. Now, back to our story. So what does it mean to study Torah like a child? Because again, Torah study, the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, the mitzvah to study Torah is wrapped in the obligation to teach Torah specifically to a young child, which tells us, again, the question is the answer. Why? Because there's a message. There's messaging in there. We're supposed to study Torah like a child is taught Torah, like a child studies Torah. So what does that mean? I'm going to share with you this incredible text. It's really, really beautiful. Take a look at text number 5. Okay, it's on page 59. For those of you here with the booklets, 59, text 5 from Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, chapter 4, Mishnah 20. This is 420 in Pirkei Avot. It says like this: Elisha ben Abuya said. By the way, Elisha ben Abuya, holy cow! This rabbi, I shouldn't say guy. This rabbi lived a very complicated life. He was one of the most righteous and scholarly rabbis of his time, and ultimately he turned away from God and observance and became a heretic. He said, I don't believe anymore. And at the end of his life, he came back again to Judaism. Very, very complicated person, very complicated story. But here is one of his teachings.
Rabbi, quick interruption. If you want to read a good book about him, it's called As a Driven Leaf.
Interesting.
In
Okay.
the 50s and it's a great book. Okay, I'm done. That's it.
Okay, good. Text 5. And by the way, Richard gets commission from that book. I'm joking. Text 5. Pirkei Avot says, Elisha ben Abuya said, listen to this, he who learns when a child, to what is he compared? In other words, when you study Torah as a child, what is that like? To ink written upon a new writing sheet. And he who learns when an old man, to what is he compared? To ink written on a rubbed or erased or rubbed out writing sheet. Wow. That's what the Mishnah says. When you study Torah as a child, it's like fresh ink on fresh parchment. Oh, it's beautiful. And when you study Torah as older, it's like the paper has been, it's not its first rodeo. It's not fresh. It's not. So the obvious question is, we're denigrating studying Torah in our later years. That doesn't make any sense. We're saying the Torah is only valuable insofar as we study when we're young, but when we're old, then we're already washed up. Is that what it means? That's what it sounds like. So there's an incredible, and I'm telling you, I learned this and it took my breath away. It took my breath away. It's so beautiful. It's dazzling. Text number 6. I'm going to read it inside. This comes from the Midrash Shmuel. Okay, he's a 16th century commentary that did a lot of commenting on Pirkei Avot, on what we're studying. So here's what he writes. He says, this passage assures the senior student that he or she should not despair and say, one second. So before I get inside, he flips it the opposite way. He says, no. Don't think that the Mishnah is telling us not to bother. Oh, if you're a kid, great, it's going to help. But when you're older, waste of time. No, God forbid. On the contrary, this passage, back inside, this passage assures the senior student that he should not despair and say, how can I learn now? My mind is akin to a paper filled with foolish worldly matters, and it cannot accept sacred matters. How could I expect to write script on top of other script? A person might say, I should study Torah. I should begin studying Torah when I'm older. I have all these other ideas in my head. I've studied all these other these other philosophies and ideas and values and whatever. It's too late. If I studied when I was a kid, it would have a chance. It could form, it could shape me, but now I'm already set. We should never say that, he says. Why not? Thus, back inside, the Mishnah states, second paragraph, the Mishnah states that while it is certainly preferable to study while young, for it is like writing on fresh paper upon which no pen has passed, a senior student should not despair and think that his studies are like writing on an already occupied sheet of paper. Rather, it is as if the previous script has been erased in such a manner that is no longer discernible. What is the meaning of, and this really only works in the Hebrew or more literal translation. The Hebrew, it says, when somebody studies Torah as an elder or in an older years, to what is he compared? And the Mishnah answers, to ink, ksuva, written on niar machik, on paper that is erased. So you think paper that's erased, that doesn't sound good. But the Midrash Shmuel says, doesn't sound good. It sounds great. And what does it mean? It means that no matter what other shtuyot, what other nonsense has filled our heads up until now, up until this point that we're studying Torah, we have the ability to etch a sketch it out. You know what etch a sketch it out means? You know what I'm talking about, right? Ready to go. Ready to go, clean slate, and that's it. This is the Midrash Shmuel. When you study Torah when you're young, blank slate, you don't have to work too hard. When you study when you're older, you need to erase, but erasing is possible so that the Torah lands properly. The Rebbe says, that's the Midrash Shmuel. I told you we have a Mishnah, the Midrash Shmuel, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Here's what the Lubavitcher Rebbe says on this Mishnah. Take a look at text number 7. Okay, text 7 on page 61 in the booklets or on the screen. Okay, what the Mishnah means when it says, he who learns Torah when a child, look at how the Rebbe interprets this, is that the person learns when a child doesn't only mean based on your passport that you're a child, but it means when a person learns with a sense of humility, putting himself aside and approaching it as a child. Studying with such an approach is really the only way for Torah to be truly absorbed as ink on fresh parchment. By contrast, when one's approach to Torah study is based on the sum total of their own intellect and rationale as a senior, without any humility, you cannot absorb the Torah, which is God's Torah after all. The Rebbe says a bit of a different twist, ultimately ending in the same place, but a bit of a different twist. The Rebbe says, what does it mean when the Mishnah contrasts, chapter 4, Mishnah 20, when the Mishnah contrasts studying Torah while young or while older? It doesn't mean biologically younger or older. It rather means, what's the mindset? What's the approach? Are you studying Torah with a fresh perspective, a blank slate? I'm open to learning. I'm open to receiving divine information. I'm open to, seeing what the Torah has to say. That's a childlike mentality or approach in studying Torah. Or am I saying, I know everything. I've already got it figured out. Let me see what Torah has to say if it fits into my worldview. That's a different approach, and that's ultimately not the ideal way. This ties in, I will say, to the third class on the resurrection of the dead course. I hate bringing that course back. That was a joke, but I'm here all week. But the resurrection of the dead course, the Thursday night course that we had, talked about this idea of blank slates. We asked the question, the resurrection of the dead, it says that those that are alive at the time of the resurrection, that are currently alive, that have never passed away, so they will pass away, and then a moment later, be resurrected. And I asked the question, what? That seems so silly. If the goal is eternal life, so then just live. Why die and then live again? Doesn't make any sense. And the answer is fresh slate, clean slate, a blank sheet of paper. And it's similar to what we're talking about tonight. When studying Torah, the goal is to study like a child. The goal is to study fresh perspective, open mind, no preconceptions, ready to absorb, ready to receive with humility.
Rabbi, I mean, since we read the Torah every year, and we come at it with a fresh perspective every year.
Donna can I phrase it as a question? I don't know that you're asking a question, but I'll ask it as a question. Donna's saying, one second, we study Torah every year. So that means we have information. If we study, I know this is not what you asked, but I'm asking the question. All right, don't worry, I'm taking your point and making it into a question. So Donna's asking a question that she didn't even know she was asking. So one second, how can we study Torah, this Torah portion of Vaeschanan, with a blank slate? We studied it last year, and the year before, we studied it every year. And what's the answer that she gave without even answering the question? The answer is, it's in the approach. We might have studied it last year, but when we study it again this year, you know what we say? We're open to learning new insights, ready to see new ideas that we didn't notice before. If we approach a Torah portion, right, and say, I already know it, what are the odds that we're going to learn something new? Nil, garnished, nada, nothing. It ain't going to happen, right? Because our minds are closed. You know which is Matasio. You know Matasio, the singer? Remember Matasio? Yeah, he slept on my couch. Matasio, like the Jewish reggae guy. Yeah. Yeah, he was here. He did a concert on
not but like where Ponce Market is now.
What was that place called?
The
Right here.
Masquerade, the Masquerade.
Masquerade, yes. He did a concert at Masquerade. It was Erev Shabbos, Friday afternoon. He did the Roxy before, yes. He did Little Five. He did what's that place? The Steelers Bar. I know it is the Steelers Bar on Piedmont.
City Winery.
City Winery he did. He also did come on.
The Fox.
The one on Peachtree,
Piedmont and Monroe. Come on, guys. Piedmont and Monroe. At the corner.
Something in the park.
No, not Smithsonian Bar. All right, anyway, here's the point. No, the real point is just how many bars do we know in Atlanta? No, and musical venues. No, but the point is, Matasio, there was a line that he had. Your cup's already full. So hold on.
And it's bound to overflow.
And it's bound to, thank you. Your cup's already full and it's bound to overflow. You know what that means? It's like he didn't explain the lyrics. I know what he meant because he took it from Chassidus. He took it from Chabad teachings. Your cup's already full. It's bound to overflow. You know what that means? When you want to pour something new in it, what's going to happen? It's not going to go inside because your cup's already full. Bound to overflow, not in a good way, in a bad way. If your cup is full, right? And Sarah, you had those lyrics, right? You were ready to go with that? Thank you. So yeah, your cup's already full. You try to pour in more. What's the secret to receiving? Empty your cup. Clean slate, blank slate, empty your cup. But wait, I have all this information. Put it aside. Put it aside, right? Little humility, a little humbling. Starting a new Torah portion every week, every Sunday, we start a new Torah portion, right? What's the message? Blank slate. Doesn't mean you have to forget everything you ever studied, but it means I'm open to learning something new. I know it all. I have the answers. No, we're open. That openness is completely profound. I need to share with you some more text. It's so beautiful. Oh, there's this whole thing, text 10, 11, 12, 13a, 13b. Hold on. Hold on one second. Where's the text that I had in mind? Oh, here we go. Text 8. I got ahead of myself. Okay, let me share my screen. This beautiful text from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, a blessed memory. Take a look at text 8. This is, we could fabrang about this all night. Fabrang meaning have deep conversations all night about this one, text number 8. Wow. This is from his Haggadah that he published in 2006. Page 62. I'm going to read this. Let me give you a background. He talks about how it's a Jewish thing to ask questions. It's a Jewish value to ask and to encourage questions to be asked. Judaism is never like, oh, you can't ask that question. Ooh, that's off limits, right? No, Judaism is all about questions. But he says, let's begin. There are conditions, though, for asking a Jewish question, right? Not every question is Jewish. There are conditions for asking a Jewish question. Number one, the first condition is that we seek genuinely to learn, not to doubt, ridicule, dismiss, reject. That is what the wicked son of the Haggadah does. Asks not out of a desire to understand, but as a prelude to walking away. This is, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. This is some of the most powerful stuff you'll ever learn about, that we'll ever learn about the nature of a question. There are some questions that seek answers, and some questions that are the answer. Sometimes we ask because we want to learn, and sometimes we ask because we want that to be our excuse to walk away. We say, how come it's like this? We get indignant. Are we seeking an answer? No. That is the answer. The answer is, it's wrong, it's flawed, I'm out. That's, he says, Rabbi Sachs says, that's the question of the Ben Rasha, of the wicked son. The wicked son is not asking out of a genuine desire to learn, but out of a desire to make a point and to mic drop and to step and to walk out of the room. That's the question that the wicked son asks. Let's jump in. Let's jump back in. That's his first point. Second point. What is the second prerequisite, the second condition for asking a Jewish question? Second paragraph, that we accept limits to our understanding. Let me jump in for 1 second, which means that even as we ask and we seek an answer, we know and we accept and we recognize that we'll never get the full answer, because there's a limit to how much we can understand. Not everything, back inside, not everything is intelligible at any given moment. There were scientists at the beginning of the 20th century who believed that virtually every major discovery had already been made, not suspecting that in the next 100 years, that the next 100 years would give rise to Einstein's relativity theory, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, Gödel's theorem, proof, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but that's how I said it, proof of the Big Bang origin of the universe and discovery of DNA and the decoding of the human genome. They thought, what else is there to learn? Hold my beer. In relation to Torah, there were many German and American Jews. This is very powerful. I'm going to say this again. In relation to Torah, in other words, Jewishly speaking, there were many German and American Jews in the 19th century who could not understand Jewish prayers for a return to Zion. Why are we saying that we want to go back to Zion? Germany is amazing. We have to go back to Zion? Germany is where it's at. Right? And deleted them from the prayer book. They took it out of the Siddur. Some communities did. Now, he doesn't even have to, does he have to even elaborate on this? You know what he's talking about, right? A few decades later, the Holocaust. And what's the safe haven? Israel, right? We have a establishment of state of Israel. Indirect, it can be noted as indirect response to the Holocaust. So what's the point? I'm not justifying the Holocaust. We're not giving reasons and rationales for the Holocaust. No, there's a very specific agenda. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm explaining what he's writing here. What he's saying is that in the 19th century, there were Jews who believed that they had to figure it out. They had to figure it out. We don't need Zion. We don't need Jerusalem. We don't need Mashiach. We don't need any of that because life is good. We have Germany. Yeah. How did that work out for you? Let's continue. These facts should induce in us a certain humility. Not every scientific orthodoxy survives the test of time. Not everything in Judaism that we do not understand is unintelligible. The very features of Jewish life, one generation finds difficult, the next generation may find the most meaningful of all. Faith is not opposed to questions, but it is opposed to the shallow certainty that what we understand is all there is. And that last line, Rabbi Sachs had a way with words, as you all know, but that last line, oh my God, that's just exquisite. I'm going to say it again. Faith is not opposed to questions, but it is opposed to the shallow certainty that what we understand is all there is. What does that mean? It means that hubris, that arrogance, that narcissism that says, I understand it, I get it, and if it makes sense to me, then it's valuable, and if it doesn't, then it should be just taken out, should be deleted, because it doesn't make sense to me. That perspective is, at best, he's being nice, shallow. I mean, you could use other words, right? But it's certainly shallow. right? Just because that you don't understand it, you don't appreciate it, you don't see the value or whatever, you have your own thoughts, so it doesn't have value. That's a very self-centered perspective, whether it's about an individual or about an era or about a community or about whatever it is. So what's the point? Questions are holy, but there's a holy way to ask a question. A holy way to ask a question is when you genuinely seek the answer, not when you're trying to make a point. A lot of times people ask questions to make a point. There might be a question mark, but it's a statement. So that's not a question, that's a statement. So that's not a question. When is a question valid? When it seeks an answer. And when there's a sense of humility in, I might not get an answer that I understand. I might not fully understand this in this moment where I am now, because it may take a while for me to get it or the world to come around and get it, but I'm okay with not having an answer also. This is what we call a blank slate. This is what it means to have the curiosity of a child. And let me just connect all the dots and we'll wrap it up, and hopefully we'll all walk away a little bit inspired from tonight's class. A child approaches a subject without any bias, without any preconception, without any sense of, oh, I know the issue, I know the answer. Child knows that they don't know the answer. It's a wonderful, it's a fresh, and I'm going to use the word effervescent to borrow a term. It's like such a beautiful buoyancy and effervescency of a child, seeing a child explore. They're not embarrassed. It's not like, oh, I don't know, I should know, because why should the child knows that they shouldn't know? To a child, everything is new. It's wondrous. It's amazing. Everything is amazing. It's beautiful to behold. It's beautiful to see the world through the eyes of a child. And that's exactly what the Torah tells us this week. The Torah says, when you study Torah, Torah says, teach your kids Torah and watch them learn. And then you should study Torah also. Oh, why does it say you study Torah in the context of teaching? Watch your kids as you teach them Torah. Watch their eyes light up. Watch them absorb. Watch them take in the words of Torah without bias and prejudice and preconception and I know it and arrogance. Just open to ideas and guidance. Torah says, do this, that, and other. Sure, let's do it. Torah says, say Shema every night. Let's do it. Yo, but you don't understand. It's not complicated. Torah says, say Shema in the morning and at night. Done. We're talking about the Shema, right? Torah says, teach your kids, little kids, Torah, and then watch, pay attention. And that's how you should study Torah. I feel like this should be a meme, right? You see a kid's eyes lighting up with wonder, right? And the message is, study Torah like this. Study Torah with the eyes of wonder as a child. And then, it's not a full cup. It's not going to overflow. It's not going to just spill out over the side. Torah is going to enter us and inspire us and infuse us with life and meaning and a perspective that we couldn't get elsewhere. When we're open to it, we can truly be transformed by it. And that's the goal. So in the final analysis, why does the Torah say to study? Why does the Torah give us the mitzvah to study Torah in the context of education? Because there's a lot to learn from the way a child learns. May we all study with the wonder of a child, and may the Torah truly impact our lives in the way that it's meant to. And let us say, Amen. L'chaim. All right,
L'chaim.
Questions. Let's jump into questions from our online crew and really our in-person crew also. We'll just open it up. Chazan, jump in.
So, back to where I sort of went back to the Harev at Torah Chabefinu, that
you're cutting out a little bit.
Make Torah sweet, make Torah sweet in the eyes of our children and all of that stuff. When you start with a child, blank slate and so on and so forth, and you infuse in them the idea of studying Torah from the very beginning, it becomes a habit. And the fact is, in the first few years of a child's life, all habits are being formed.
Right.
And so when you form Torah as part of their looking at life from the prospect of Torah, then that's going to stay with them forever.
Beautifully said.
And
yes.
And that's why it's so important to start with them when they're young.
I gotta tell you a story. Yeah,
my
100%.
belief is that's why the Torah says,
Sure.
that start from the very beginning.
Beautifully stated.
And why do you have to study Torah? How can you teach Torah if you don't know it? So learn it, then you can teach it.
Let me tell you a story that you'll love, I think, that everybody will love. A couple once came to the Rebbe for advice about education. They said our child, is now 3, and we want to get an early start on their Jewish education, and they had questions, what to learn, what to teach, whatever, what schooling or what early education. The Rebbe responded, why did you wait so late? Kind of like 3, it's a young age, but it took 3 years, right? Torah begins moment number 1. I got to tell you another story. This is a Talmudic story. The Talmud says about, I forget who, one of the great sages of the Talmud. It says, you know why he became a great sage? Because when he was a baby, his mother would bring him to the Beit Medrash, to the study hall, in a stroller, in one of those silver cross, silver Star of David, silver peg Perego, whatever it is, right?
Pram.
The pram, yes, the pram, exactly, with the big wheels or whatever they had 1700 years ago. So his mother brought him to the study hall, and he was completely taken and absorbed in that aura and that atmosphere of Torah study. So yes, what we do as children is ingrained with us. But I saw in the comments something very powerful also. So lots of good comments in the good comments in the chat, in the comment section. But I am also looking here. Shalom's asking questions. Steve writes, if you start studying Torah later in life, you are again a clean slate. Yeah. And that's the goal. The goal is to study Torah whenever we study Torah, right? The goal is to study Torah in a way that it's open to the possibilities. And hopefully we're humble enough to say, you know what? I have all this information that I know. I'm happy to put it aside and see what Torah has to say. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah, Donna.
So getting back to what you said.
I'm going to repeat the question of the comment.
Okay. Now, I did look up and click on Google. Zeus, yes, was the
Zeus.
foundation of the Olympics.
The Olympics is founded on Zeus. I thought so.
So that brings me to a question. So, the foundation of all of undergraduate 4-year degrees,
Mm-hmm.
one of the core courses is Greek mythology, and that they present it as the foundation of.
So you're saying Greek mythology is one of the foundations of undergraduate?
Yes.
Okay.
The core for everyone.
It wasn't I studied the Rabbinical College of America.
Okay.
I got my degree from the Rabbinical College of America. And the Rabbinical College of America, the RCA in Morristown, New Jersey, it was definitely not one of the prerequisites, but I hear you. I don't have experience elsewhere.
Yeah, so
I'm open.
that's my question to you.
Is it not kosher?
Yeah.
Should we not study it? I told you the story kind of anecdotally because I mentioned pass the baton, and Rabbi Schussman just retold the story about his dad, and the theme of the speech in the article was pass the baton, and the Rebbe said, let's avoid, we don't need to go all Olympics, right? We don't need to brand a Jewish magazine Olympics, the Olympics edition. So that was kind of the message. Does it mean, I don't know, it's a good question. I don't know that I'm not qualified to answer the question. Hold on one second.
Okay.
Presented, its core, it's presented as our foundation, as America.
You're saying that the Greek mythology is presented as American foundation.
As our
It's philosophy.
Our thinking.
It's kind of the foundation of this.
So I want to go to the point here. It seems universally, it says it's best to study, or it's good to study Torah when you're young.
Yes.
Because you have an open mind. And
It's
then
better.
It goes back
I'm gonna
and
repeat this
forth
again.
a couple of times with different reasons about when you're older, is it a good or a bad thing? And
Right.
The one with Rabbi Schneerson, he says when you're older, if you study it without any humility, you can't absorb Torah. That was his point.
Right.
What I was gonna ask, or maybe it's a general statement, I'd like you to comment on it, is that could it be that when you're young, because I have a teenage daughter, you could also not have humility in a
Yes.
certain sense of.
Let me repeat your question. Yeah.
And then when you're older, you regain that?
Yeah. So let me repeat your question, and then we'll jump into this, a little bit of a quick discussion on this. So Ed is saying that, the Mishnah says that when you're young, you're a blank slate. When you're older, maybe not. And there was a Midrash Shmuel that said, no, when you're older, you can erase it if you want. The Rebbe said that if you have humility, then no matter what age, you can absorb it. But there's always a danger when you're older that you might not be able to kind of shed your preconceptions, and you might be a little bit jaded in your study, and then it's not going to be pure. But when you're younger, it's a pure experience. And Ed's asking, who says? Is that necessarily the case? What if what about someone who's younger and they have biases and they have their own conceptions of the world, like a teenager that has their own, they've got things figured out, let's say. Certainly parents have no say in teenagers. Definitely a parent's opinion is like, I'm kidding, right? But sometimes it's not the highest on the list. And an adult might be more open, more receptive. So that's your question. So it doesn't fit into the paradigm where we're saying that younger is typically better. Maybe it's the other way. So my response is, I agree with you 100%. And I don't believe that, according to the Midrash Shmuel or the way the Rebbe is understanding, or really any commentaries, that young and old is locked in as, a certain age or a cutoff. Past that age, you're in this category or before. I think it's more of a perspective. That phrase, you're only as old as you feel, or something like that. Or not. If not, then I just made it up, and feel free to pay me every time you use it. No, it is a phrase. My mom says, okay, don't pay me, whoever coined it. Turns out I just got dinged on my account. Back to the point here. It's really about a perspective. You could have someone young that is completely closed. You could have someone older who's completely open. It's a perspective. But typically, when we say young, we mean like a child, not a teenager, but like a child who's learning. Yeah, a child doesn't have any. What's a child going to say? Like, no, I actually disagree because I have a different way of looking at things. At a young age, they've never thought about it before. They don't even know what that is. Like a slide. It's a slide. I don't know why I'm going with a slide. It's in my head now. I don't know. We're just going to go down that. So a slide. You know what a slide is? I like it. I don't like it. It's a slide. We're doing it. I don't know. It's a little example, but I think it means at a very young age, there's no other information that we're comparing to. A little older, even teenager would be older compared to that. We have already ideas and notions and whatever, but I don't believe that it is I think the point is it's not a hard and fast rule based on age. It's based on, we can choose perspective. We can choose.
Sorry. Go ahead.
One second. I see here, I'm looking at the chat. Analyzing. Yeah. Teacher's son to swim. Okay. All right. Yeah. No, we're good. Okay.
So at the end of a service every week, and it comes from a Mishnah from Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Hanina.
1 second.
Right?
The wine.
Yeah, the wine. I hope it's not Mavusal, but anyway, that's my shtick. We always compare Torah to fine wine and all of that, but al tikrei banayich ela bonayich,
right?
And I think that's the kind of phrase for this, lesson. And shalom rav lo have Torah techa. So Torah, whatever age it is, the students of Torah are the builders of the nation of Israel.
Yeah.
And that's I think this Torah portion also kind of leads to that. How do you build Judaism? You build it by studying Torah.
100%. That's something that very, very well said.
Rabbi, in the Jerusalem Talmud, I think Rabbi Nathan asks the question, why do the Talmud Hokan go to the circus? And the answer was that when gladiators are fighting, when there are Jewish participants in the gladiators fighting, the crowd either puts thumbs up or thumbs down, whether the victim will die or not. And so that's why the rabbis go to the circus. Now, I don't know what connection that has to do with the Greek tradition of the Olympics, and I'm not sure the tradition of the Maccabees games, but I think somehow there's a connection between all those things. Don't ask me what connection.
I'm not familiar with that teaching of the Jerusalem Talmud. I would need to look that up to comment on it intelligibly, but definitely interesting. Listen, the point of the class is really not an anti-Olympic stance. It's really, there was no intention of tonight's class to get up in a soapbox and cancel the Olympics. That was not the intention. It's not my platform, huh? A week before. By the way, Rabbi Ari, it might be canceled by
Only
COVID.
for COVID.
Here, COVID. But here's the point. I don't know that it's even a question that there isn't a dark history behind these things. I don't know for sure, but that's my understanding. I think the gladiator was Rome and not Greece, but they might have been intertwined. I don't know. We got to look it up, or we don't have to look it up. You do whatever you want.
There's a book that's probably.
You were taught that this is the fundamentals of Western thought. Foundation of Western thought, right? Right, and not like a Greek and
that depends on who writes the book.
Right. Well, she's talking about she went to NY Jew.
NY
Jew, that's what they were teaching. Can you imagine? There's
an incredible book
with the Mori. Anyway,
there's an incredible book that's probably out of print, and it's called The Hellenization of the Jews.
There you go.
And it writes about all the descendants of Matityahu and how they became. Basically, the rabbis didn't like them because they were priests, warriors, kings. They wanted to separate church and state as we know it today.
Right.
However, they kept their Judaism through Roman times,
Right.
And so even though they were given Greek names and so on and so forth, we tend to follow our traditions, and I think we always will. There'll be distractions on the way.
Correct.
And B'nai Shalom is going to take care of us. And
I will tell you, I will not request to be called Rabbi Arius Flavius. When that happens,
there you go.
To go to someone else's class because I've gone off the deep end. Adina Malka, you have the last word. Jump in.
I wanted to share something with you. Earlier we were studying that a parent should teach Torah to their child.
Right.
And my father never could, but he did teach me. I was a Jew.
Nice. Beautiful. I love that. Very, very touching. And her dad taught her that she was Jewish. And that flame is still burning very strong. Feel good, by the way, sending lots of blessings and prayers for your good health, Adina Malka. We said prayers for you on Shabbos, Mishaberach. So I hope that you're feeling good.
I am. Thank you for your
Baruch
prayers.
Hashem. Baruch Hashem. I'm not going to take credit. The Abishur takes credit, but please God, you should only have good health. All of us should have good health. I want to sign off officially. Laila Tov, have a good night. It is great to see you all. Sending lots of love to everybody. And we'll see you guys soon. So we have a film screening. The next Sunday is our barbecue. I'm just giving commercials now quickly. Our IJ barbecue, open to everyone. Come and join us for some amazing food. Not this Sunday, the next Sunday. This Sunday is a film screening. Anyway, check out the website for more information. We'll see you guys soon. Take care, everybody.